Story 1, The Silent Rebirth. Amelia Snowcroft tightened the straps of her backpack, her breath fogging the air as she climbed higher along the rugged path of Mount Ira. She had always found solace in the vast wilderness, towering peaks, untouched snow, and the quiet hum of nature. This climb was supposed to be her final adventure before returning home for Christmas. The forecast had promised clear skies, but the mountains had other plans. By the time she reached the base of a jagged ridge, ominous clouds had gathered, casting a heavy shadow over the pristine landscape. "Not good," she muttered, wiping a strand of auburn hair from her flushed face. Before she could retreat, a deafening crack echoed through the valley. Snow and ice cascaded down the mountain, consuming everything in its path. Amelia barely had time to react before the avalanche swallowed her world in white chaos. When she came to, she was sprawled at the edge of a dense forest. Disoriented and shivering, she checked her injuries, bruised but alive. Looking up, she noticed faint lights flickering through the trees. With no choice but to seek shelter, she stumbled toward the glow, unaware of the horrors waiting for her in the forgotten village of Solstice Hollow. The lights led Amelia to the edge of a small, eerie village nestled in the valley. The snow-covered rooftops of old, timber-framed houses looked like they belonged to another century. Smoke curled weakly from chimneys, and faint Christmas decorations dangled lifelessly in the frigid wind. As Amelia stepped into the village square, a chilling silence enveloped her. No footsteps, no laughter, only the whistle of the wind through the cracked window panes. The sight of a glowing lantern swinging outside and in gave her a sliver of hope. The sign above the door read, "Hollow Hearth Tavern." Pushing open the creaking door, she stepped into the dimly lit interior. The air was heavy with the scent of pinewood smoke and something faintly metallic. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. An elderly man appeared from behind the bar, his lined face shadowed by the dim light of the fireplace. His eyes, sharp and weary, scanned her from head to toe. "Stranger, and not many pass through these parts," he said in a gravelly voice. "You're lucky to be alive after that storm." "I was caught in an avalanche," Amelia explained, her teeth chattering. "I need to wait out the storm before I can try to leave." The man's expression darkened. "The storm, it's not the only thing to fear here." Before Amelia could question him, a middle-aged woman entered, carrying a tray of steaming tea. She introduced herself as Marta, the innkeeper. "You must be frozen, dear. Come sit by the fire." Amelia thanked her and sank into the warmth, but the unease in the room was palpable. The other patrons, a handful of villagers, sat hunched over their drinks, avoiding her gaze. Whispers passed between them, words too quiet to catch. "What's going on here?" Amelia asked, lowering her voice. Marta hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she set the tea down. "This village, it carries a curse," she whispered. "Especially on Christmas Eve." After much coaxing, Marta shared the village's haunting tale. Long ago, a woman named Eleanor lived here. She was a healer, known for her kindness. But when a terrible sickness swept through the village, the people turned on her, accusing her of witchcraft. They believed she had cursed the land. Amelia leaned forward, her heart racing. What happened to her? Marta swallowed hard. On Christmas Eve, they dragged her to the church and, she paused, her voice barely audible. They burned her alive. A heavy silence hung in the room. Amelia glanced toward the window, where the snow was falling harder now. "And you think she cursed the village?" Martin nodded. "Every Christmas Eve, strange things happen. People disappear. Shadows move where there should be none. And sometimes, she comes back. Amelia felt a chill creep down her spine. Comes back. She was buried in the old cemetery beyond the church. It said her spirit rises when the bells toll at midnight. She seeks vengeance on those who wronged her and anyone who dares to stay. The old man from behind the bar snorted. It's all nonsense, he muttered. Just old stories to scare folks. But the fear in Marta's eyes told Amelia otherwise. Determined to uncover the truth, Amelia ventured outside. The church stood at the far end of the village, its bell tower silhouetted against the swirling snow. As she approached, the wind carried a faint sound like a mournful hymn. Inside the church, cobwebs draped the pews, and the air was thick with decay. A single candle flickered on the altar. Amelia's gaze fell on a plaque embedded in the wall. Eleanor Drayton, the fallen healer. May her soul find peace. Suddenly, the bell overhead began to toll, its sound echoing through the empty halls. It wasn't midnight yet, but the deep, resonant chime filled Amelia with dread. A shadow moved in the corner of her vision. Turning quickly, she saw nothing but the open door swinging in the wind. Her heart pounded as she stepped outside. The snowstorm had worsened, and strange shapes seemed to flicker in the darkness. Whispers carried on the wind, growing louder as she hurried back to the inn. Amelia burst back into the Hollow Hearth Tavern, her boots tracking snow onto the wooden floor. The villagers inside turned to her, their faces pale and drawn. The church, she stammered. The bell tolled before midnight. I think I saw something. A young man near the fire laughed nervously. The storm's playing tricks on you, stranger. But Marta shook her head, her hands trembling as she clutched her shawl. It's starting, she whispered. What's starting? Amelia demanded, her voice rising. The old man from the bar stood abruptly. Enough of this nonsense. There's no ghost, no curse, just a bunch of cowards scaring themselves. He stormed toward the door. Don't go. Marta pleaded, but he ignored her and pushed the door open. Snow and wind howled into the room as he stepped outside, muttering curses under his breath. The door slammed shut behind him. Minutes passed in tense silence. Then, a scream tore through the night, a sound so raw and filled with terror that it froze Amelia in her seat. The villagers exchanged panicked glances, but no one moved. Amelia grabbed a lantern from the table. We can't just sit here. No. Marta cried, but Amelia was already outside. The wind lashed at her face as she followed the sound of the scream. She found the old man near the edge of the forest, his body crumpled in the snow. His eyes were wide open, his face twisted in horror. Around him, the snow was undisturbed, as if he had simply fallen dead where he stood. A faint melody drifted through the air, a haunting, mournful tune that sent shivers down her spine. Amelia turned, her lantern casting long shadows. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a figure, a woman in a tattered dress, her face obscured by darkness, standing among the trees. And then she was gone. Back at the tavern, Amelia relayed what she had seen. The villagers were in an uproar, their fear palpable. It's her, Marta whispered. Eleanor has risen. A burly man slammed his fist on the table. We should leave. Get as far from this cursed place as we can. Marta shook her head. The storm won't let you. And even if you could, she would find you. No one escapes her wrath. Amelia frowned. Why now? What does she want? Revenge, Marta replied. Every year, she takes more of us. It's as if she's building towards something, or waiting for someone. Amelia felt a chill run through her. The villagers' superstitions were unnerving, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was truth to their words. Determined to understand what was happening, Amelia decided to investigate the cemetery where Eleanor was buried. Armed with a lantern and Marta's reluctant blessing, she set out into the storm. The cemetery was a desolate place, with ancient, crumbling headstones jutting out of the snow. In the center stood a large, weathered grave marked with Eleanor's name. As Amelia approached, the wind died down, leaving an eerie silence. She knelt to examine the grave, her fingers brushing against the cold, stone surface. Suddenly, the ground beneath her shifted, and she fell back in alarm. A crack had appeared across the gravestone, and from it seeped a faint, unnatural light. "Who dares disturb my rest?" a voice whispered, low and echoing. Amelia stumbled to her feet, her heart pounding. She turned to see a figure standing at the edge of the cemetery, a woman in a flowing, tattered dress, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly fire. "Eleanor," Amelia breathed. Eleanor stepped forward, her presence commanding and terrible. "They betrayed me," she said, her voice filled with both sorrow and rage. "Burned me in the name of their God. Now, they shall pay." Amelia forced herself to stand her ground. "I'm not from this village. I didn't hurt you." Eleanor tilted her head, her fiery eyes narrowing. "And yet, you stand among them. You carry their blood on your hands." "I don't," Amelia insisted. "Please, let me help you. There has to be a way to end this without more bloodshed." Eleanor's expression softened for a brief moment, but then her face twisted with anger. "There is no peace for the betrayed," she hissed. "Only justice." The ground trembled, and shadows began to rise from the graves around Amelia. Desperate, she fled back toward the village, Eleanor's voice echoing behind her. "You cannot escape the past." Amelia stumbled back into the tavern, her face pale and her breathing ragged. The villagers gathered around her, their expressions filled with dread as she recounted her encounter with Eleanor. "She's awake," Amelia said, her voice shaking. "And she's not stopping until this village pays for what it did." The burly man from earlier stood abruptly. "If she's after us, we should destroy her grave, end this once and for all." "No," Marta snapped. "You don't understand. The more we defile her memory, the stronger her curse becomes." Amelia thought back to Eleanor's words. She said something about betrayal and justice. Maybe this isn't about revenge. Maybe she's waiting for someone to make things right. "What could possibly make this right?" a woman in the corner sobbed. "We can't undo what our ancestors did." Amelia hesitated, unsure of the answer herself. Suddenly, the tavern door blew open, and a frigid wind swept through the room. Shadows flickered along the walls, and a mournful wail filled the air. "She's coming," Marta whispered, clutching a rosary to her chest. The church bell began to toll once more, louder and more persistent than before. Amelia grabbed her lantern and ran outside, the villagers trailing reluctantly behind her. The village square was blanketed in an unnatural darkness, the snow falling in slow, heavy flakes. In the center of it all stood Eleanor, her form both ethereal and terrifying. Around her, the shadows of long-dead villagers writhed like phantoms. Amelia stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Eleanor, wait. Tell me what you want. How can we end this?" Eleanor's fiery gaze landed on Amelia. "You think you can mend what was broken? You think your words can cleanse the sins of the past? Maybe not, Amelia admitted, but someone has to try. For a moment, Eleanor hesitated, her spectral form flickering. Then she raised her hand, and the phantoms lunged toward the villagers. Chaos erupted. The villagers screamed as the phantoms surrounded them, dragging some into the shadows. Amelia darted toward Eleanor, dodging the icy tendrils that lashed out at her. "You were betrayed, Eleanor," Amelia said, her voice steady despite her fear. "But not everyone here is guilty. There must be another way to find peace." Eleanor's expression faltered. "They stood by and watched as I burned. None of them are innocent. But their descendants didn't commit that crime." Amelia shouted. "You were a healer. You helped people. Is this what you want to be remembered for?" Eleanor's glowing eyes dimmed slightly. "You speak of peace, yet you carry no solution." Amelia hesitated. Then she remembered the cracked gravestone and the light beneath it. "Your grave, it's broken. What if it's a sign that you can be free? Maybe we can put you to rest properly." Eleanor tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "You would do this for me?" "Yes," Amelia said firmly. "But you have to let them go." The phantoms paused, their writhing forms freezing mid-air. Eleanor stared at Amelia, then slowly lowered her hand. Amelia led the villagers to the cemetery, Eleanor's presence looming behind them like a shadow. Marta brought candles and holy water, and the burly man carried a shovel, his hands trembling. They reached Eleanor's grave, the crack in the stone glowing faintly. "What do we do?" Amelia asked. "Restore it," Marta said. "Give her the respect she was denied." The villagers worked together, repairing the grave as best they could. They cleaned the stone, lit candles, and placed a wreath of winter flowers at its base. Eleanor watched silently, her form flickering like a flame in the wind. When they finished, Amelia turned to her. "It's done," she said softly. "You can rest now." For a moment, the village fell silent. Then Eleanor's form began to dissolve, her fiery eyes softening into a quiet glow. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carried away by the wind. By dawn, the storm had lifted, and the village was eerily still. The survivors gathered in the square, their faces pale but relieved. Amelia looked toward the cemetery. Eleanor's grave was intact, and the unnatural glow had disappeared. But a lingering unease remained in the air, as if her presence hadn't fully left. Marta approached Amelia. "You've done something no one else dared to try. Perhaps now, we can start to heal." Amelia nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. As Amelia prepared to leave the village, she glanced back at the church. The bell tower stood silent, its shadow stretching across the snow. But as she turned to continue her journey, a faint toll echoed through the valley, soft and distant, yet unmistakable. Amelia paused, a chill running down her spine. Somewhere deep in her heart, she knew, Eleanor's story wasn't over.